It's not temporary. When that 911 call comes in and a woman's being raped, the cop shows up in time to prevent the rape. It's not temporary to that woman. It's not temporary to the guy whose store is being held up and there's a gun pointed at his head. If a cop shows up and he's not killed, that's not temporary.
Here's my point is, it is a fact. Ever since I wrote the crime bill 20 years ago, we've put to rest the notion that if you have more cops, there's less crime. When you drastically cut the number of police in cities, which is happening all across America, crime goes up. That is a fact. Now, they either are going to figure out how to help those cities the way we want to help them or some other way. But if they don't get help, crime is going to continue to go up. It's that simple. It's not an ideological point. It's not a political point. It's just a physical reality.
Welcome back to Morning Joe. Steve Ratner and Richard Haas are still with us, and joining the table now, Republican Senator from Wyoming and member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator John Barrasso.
Senator, can I ask you a question? Because it seems to me
for your support.
I had a misspent youth when I was in Congress. I never once said, pass my bill or you'll be raped. And I'm just looking at this Biden thing, and I'm just thinking,
say that, Joe.
You can put that on a bumper sticker and sell that baby.
It does seem to me over the top. It seems desperate. You know, the president says use civil language, and then we see this language coming out of the vice president.
That's not what he said.
Of course it's over the top. It's Joe Biden.
And the other thing is that, actually rape in Flint, Michigan, where he was talking about the FBI statistics show it went down 11%. And yet one day he said it went up 150%. The week later he says it's tripled. Another day he says it's quadrupled.
Well, he's a politician. So it's 150% up versus down 11%. He's only 161% off.
Or tripled, depending on which day he's telling the story.
It doesn't matter. We love Joe.
You have misquoted him.
Oh, come on. He basically said, pass our bill or you'll be raped.
Say that.
Yes, he did. Let's play the clip again. And you tell me what he is saying here. TJ, creator of Morning Joe. Put it up.
Can you roll the tape?
Can you put it up, TJ?
It's not temporary. When that 911 call comes in and a woman's being raped, the cop shows up in time to prevent the rape. It's not temporary to that woman. It's not temporary to the guy whose store is being held up and there's a gun pointed at his head. If a cop shows up and he's not killed, that's not temporary.
I don't know how you can say.
Translation, crime will go up
if you don't pass
reduce
this
the
bill.
number of forces on the streets that are fighting crime. The bill increases the number of forces on the street.
There are 1,000 ways you can increase the number of forces on the street.
But it's not what you said.
No, it is what I said.
Exaggeration.
Oh, so I get it. So I understand what the rules are. That if a Republican says something hateful, you will speak out against that, as will I. But when a Democrat says something that is hateful, you are going to defend it. So are those the rules we play by here now?
Again, hateful's not the word I would use. I'd say he's extremely nervous about the state of this country, especially given the disparity that's in it now and the desperation on the streets of this country that we will see bubble over.
So you were saying that hold on, look at me. You were saying that because the senator didn't support this bill, he is contributing to the rape of women. No, that's exactly what Joe Biden said. So why don't you look at the senator and ask him whether he thinks that's hateful or not?
First of all, that's not what I'm saying.
That is exactly what you're saying.
You're taking Joe Biden's words and my words and tying them up in a knot in the way you want. And Senator, I'd like to hear what you have to say about Biden's statements and why you think they were inappropriate. If you agree with me, say that if the number of cops on the streets go down, crime will go up. Isn't that what he's saying? Or is he being hateful, as Joe is saying?
To me, he's over the top. We have 14 million Americans looking for work in this country. We have 9.1% unemployment. Harry Reid said the problem is the public sector, not the private sector. The private sector has lost 2.5 million jobs in the last 2 years. There are more government workers now than there has ever been before. We need to focus on those people. The president and now the vice president has taken their eye off of the ball of getting America back to work. And passed this bill now. They're pivoting today to we can't wait, which is the new kind of the flavor of the month for the president. I mean, it is astonishing. I want to work to get more people working in this country. I want to work with Democrats to do that in a bipartisan way. Anytime we do work together, the president tries to hide that. Where was the Rose Garden signing ceremony for the 3 free trade agreements. He canceled it because it steps on the message that Republicans and Democrats do want to work together to get people to work.
So what parts of the jobs bill do Republicans like and will sign up for?
Okay, how about the one that has to do with the 3% government holdback on money on government contracts? We took that to the floor of the Senate Thursday night. Scott Brown brought it. 10 Democrats voted in favor of it. All of the Republicans voted in favor of it. It is part of the president's jobs bill. And yet Harry Reid's down there saying, no, we can't let this part pass. There are good parts. It has to do with wounded warriors. I want to do that. In terms of the also the one of the tax components of this to make it easier on small businesses, I'm for that. I want to make it permanent, not just temporary.
So there are areas that Republicans and Democrats can agree on.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I still think it's fascinating, Mika, that if Michelle Bachmann had said something like that Barack Obama was contributing to a situation that would lead to increased rapes in America, you would be going crazy right now. The same with Herman Cain, and I would be agreeing with you. But here you've got the Vice President of the United States who suggested before that Republicans were hostage takers, and now this time has said, pass a bill with a tax increase in it or you are contributing to the increase of rape and robbery across America, and you want to give him a free pass. It just doesn't, it's not consistent.
I think it was highly emotional, the way he presented it, but what he was saying is that the numbers will go up. If
when Rush gets excited and says some really inappropriate things, emotions involved there too. You just can't call out the other side and not call out your own.
Well, look, he said it had already gone up, which turned out not to be true. And however you want to characterize it, I think it was over the top. I think it wasn't appropriate for the conversation we're trying to have.
Why is it that the president, following up on the senator's comments, why is it that the president and the Republicans can't make a more public showing of getting together on some of these issues? Is it in the president's best interest to look like he's cooperating with Republicans, or do you think he's moved past that now, Steve?
Well, I think he's reached a conclusion that he's never really going to be able to cooperate with Republicans, rightly or wrongly, Senator, and you may have a different view. And as you can see, he's out now campaigning, basically taking his message to the people.
Do you think that's a fair conclusion? That the Republicans have stiffed him enough that at some point the president needs to just go out on his own? And
the senator can disagree, but I think there are some areas where there may be agreement. But when you look at the totality of the $447 billion proposal, I don't sense that there's enough agreement to get the bulk of that through the Senate and the House at this point. And therefore, the president is back where he is.
Well, we worked with him on the transportation bill. We worked with him on the federal aviation bill. There are things I want to work with him, but there is a philosophical difference in terms of this so-called jobs bill. And we know what didn't work with the first stimulus when the president promised pass this and we'll keep unemployment below 8%. Instead, it went to 10%. And what we know doesn't work is more borrowing, more spending, over-regulation, and threatening to raise taxes.
But Senator, that's fair, and that's a perfectly reasonable point of view. But that is the bulk of the president's proposal that you basically just said you opposed. So it makes it hard to work together when there's fundamental opposition on the heart of the bill.
And there are things that we can work on to actually get people back to work. I mean, I'm sorry that Harold Ford Jr. isn't here. He had an incredible editorial last week about jobs, and it sounded like the Republican jobs plan. It said, put a moratorium on regulations. He talked about 4,000 regulations. Talked about the Keystone XL pipeline. Tens of thousands of people could go back to work that way. Talked about what the governor of New York is doing with fracking and energy and those $80,000 a year jobs. There are a lot of jobs to be had that are right now being impacted, not by the president's jobs, but by things we could do today.
Richard? And what's scary is it's still 12 months before the election, 16 months before, if you will, the second Obama or the first Romney or whatever administration takes over. We can't drift for the next 12 to 16 months. The costs of that are extraordinary, and that's what's so worrisome about this conversation.
That's exactly what it looks like we're doing. We are going to drift for a year because the president's out campaigning, Republicans are out campaigning, and very little compromise.
And meanwhile, our foreign policy is beginning to bubble over and maybe even come to the forefront where people clue in on that and see that we have a number of big problems on our hands.
Senator, where would you be on the infrastructure bank? It's a relatively small amount of money. It's something that I think a lot of us believe we should turn our attention to. Is that one the Republicans can support?
I don't see that at this point. I want to see the specific details of it, how the funding is, if that comes through taxation, and what's the government's role and what's the private sector's role in creating jobs in America, and I want to look for ways to make it easier and cheaper for the private sector to create jobs, and so much of what I see coming out of this administration makes it harder and more expensive.
Senator, I want to get your insight on some of the major developments over the weekend. President Obama's announcement, of course, on Friday that all U.S. forces will be withdrawn from Iraq by the end of this year is drawing some intense criticism. Of particular concern is whether the move will help give Iran added influence in the region.
I think it's a serious mistake, and there was never really serious negotiations between the administration and the Iraqis. They could have clearly made an arrangement for U.S. troops. Yes, I'm here in the region, and yes, it is viewed in the region as a victory for the Iranians. I'm very, very concerned about increased Iranian influence in Iraq.
I would argue that Iraq and Afghanistan's being run out of Chicago, not Washington, in terms of decisions. He's put in question our success in Afghanistan, and he ended Iraq poorly. He fumbled the ball inside of the 10. I hope I'm wrong about what happens in Iraq, but they're dancing in the streets in Tehran.
So, Senator, as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, do you have any concerns that reflect Senator McCain's? Because Secretary Clinton said on Meet the Press yesterday, and she clarified and reiterated several times that this is Bush's timetable.
I think that you have to not make political decisions. You have to make military-directed decisions. I know that a general on the ground in Iraq said he thought they needed about 15,000 troops to remain there. I think it's a mistake to pull out everyone on a deadline date. I mean, look at the Korean War. We still have over 30,000 troops in South Korea. You take a look at after World War II in Germany, we left 300,000 troops there for decades. So I think to go from where we were to zero is putting out the welcome mat for Iran. Iran is my concern there. I mean, there's a long border between Iraq and Iran, and it is now a porous border, so I think it's a mistake to just take everyone out and not leave troops
We've been there for 8 years, though, and the Iraqis are not going to grant immunity to our soldiers. Do you really want a kid from Kansas to be in Iraq and be subject to the whims of El Sadr's?
No, I think
a riot that El Sadr might gin up, and suddenly a kid from Kansas gets thrown into jail?
No, absolutely not. And we all owe a great debt as a nation to all of these wonderful young men and women who have risked their lives, shed blood, and some lost their lives, both in Iraq as well as in Afghanistan. I think this is what this agreement, the SOFA as they call it, is something they would have worked out by the end of the year. So our troops could have stayed there without that.
So let's go from Iraq to Afghanistan. Obviously, you watch the show every day, and maybe you even throw things at the TV set once in a while, but you certainly know that we're skeptical about Afghanistan. We're skeptical about a war where we've been over there for a decade. There are some generals that want us to stay another decade. And this past weekend, you had the head of Afghanistan, Karzai, saying that if there were a war between the United States and Pakistan, he'd choose Pakistan.
It is really astonishing. I've been already to Afghanistan earlier this year. I've been to Iraq 4 times, Afghanistan a number of times.
But that's who we're fighting for.
Every time I go.
Our young men and women are fighting and dying to prop this clown up.
Well, it's often the choice is between bad and worse, and we're in a situation now with Pakistan and its nuclear weapons. We are continuing to try to train the troops in Afghanistan to take over. They are getting better. They're not quite there yet.
For how long?
But they'll be.
They've had a decade. I don't mean to be short with you, but I mean, come on. They've been there for a decade. How much longer?
Yeah, I can't give you a timeline on that. The president called that the good war. You've heard all of this.
It's not the good war.
Richard Haass, if the choice is between bad and worse, then the generals are always going to say we need more troops and more time.
And the lesson of all this, as Stan McChrystal admitted the other day when he spoke at the Council on Foreign Relations, is local realities count more than global abstractions. The local realities of Pakistan and Afghanistan argue against what we're doing, and that ought to mean we wind down what it is we're doing at a much faster rate than the 2014-2015 trajectory. A lot of Americans are going to lose their lives. We're still spending $2 billion a week, and come 2015, we're not going to have enough to show for what it is we're doing.
$2 billion a week to prop up Karzai's government when we don't have money to keep our infrastructure up? I believe me, I know that there are people in Wyoming, in Northwest Florida, conservatives that say it's not worth that investment anymore.
And we're borrowing $4 billion a day. Just you talk about the infrastructure and the other things.
Right.
We're borrowing $4 billion a day. So much of it from China.
So can we afford $2 billion a week to fight a war that props up Karzai? So when we leave, whether it's 2 years from now or 10 years from now, China gets all the mineral rights from Afghanistan? That doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
You agree?
Well, you know, you make a case that is one that is absolutely worth debating and discussing. And I would listen to the generals on the ground. I've been in the Armandab north of Kandahar with General McChrystal and with Senator McCain, and I will tell you, we met with a number of. You talk about the localities of this. Met with a number of the tribal chieftains. None of those chieftains are still alive, and that was just a year and a half ago.
Wow, isn't that something?
This isn't going to work. We are not going to have results that in any way are going to be commensurate with our investment, either our human investment, our military investment, or our financial investment. And that is a fact of life.
Senator, final question. How do you respond to Lindsey Graham talking about the possible invasion of Wyoming?
What are the generals on the ground think?
Yeah. Would you like us to explain to him that that is actually
we would welcome everyone to Wyoming. It's a beautiful state. The economy is strong because we have low taxes. And we use our mineral
What's the
resources
unemployment
wisely.
rate?
It's less than 6%.
Wow.
High quality of life, low cost of living. It's a great place. Come visit.
I would love to.
We will. Thank you for coming.
Senator Barrasso,
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
We love having you on.
It's always great. Thank you.
Still ahead, Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels and executive editor of the New York